This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
The author of Stop North Korea, a radical new approach to the North Korean standoff, Shepherd Iverson, on this edition of Conversations. Shepherd Iverson has an unconventional view on how the world should deal with North Korea. In his latest book, Stop North Korea, a radical new approach to the North Korean standoff, Iverson argues for an unorthodox approach to dealing with the North Korean regime. The former professor at the Institute for Korean Studies at Inha University in South Korea has written extensively about North Korea. His work has appeared in numerous national and international publications. He is also the author of One Korea, a proposal for peace. We welcome Shepherd Iverson to Conversations. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate the invitation to speak here.
And before I go too much farther, I do want to mention that as we tape this program, the summit that was supposed to occur in Singapore between President Trump and Kim Jong-un has been called off as of today. President Trump called it off. Now, that obviously is subject to change, so if you're watching this, many months down the road, perhaps things have changed. But let me begin with that piece of news. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, many people, including myself, thought that the premise of these talks was in jeopardy to begin with. It was very questionable whether North Korea, whether Kim Jong-un would ever consider getting rid of his nuclear weapons. And for Trump to ask him to do that without much of a promise of security for his future seemed unrealistic for many people in Washington and elsewhere.
I know I'm asking you to speculate on this, but now the ball clearly is in Kim Jong-un's court, so he's going to have to respond. The world's going to be watching. What do you think? What do you think he does?
Well, he's in a very tricky situation because he needs his nuclear weapons to feel secure, not just from a United States or allied South Korea attack, but or a decapitation attempt, but also domestically. He gets a good deal of political points for having nuclear weapons among his crowd in North Korea, among his elites, the elites that keep him in power. So to give up something that is so important to his personal prestige and political power inside North Korea would jeopardize his legitimacy and create problems for him in the long run.
How do you think he views himself?
Well, it's not for me to speculate what's going on inside his head. Many people do that, and it's a losing battle. We try to predict what's going on in Trump's head, too, and that doesn't seem to work out too well. It's quite possible he's a very reasonable, rational man doing the best of a bad situation. Let's remember that he inherited the situation. So many of us in life adapt to the circumstances of which we're confronted, and he's no different than most of us. He came into a very difficult situation before he was ready. He hadn't had much time to prepare for the president, for the chairmanship, like his father, Kim Jong-il, had many years to prepare. Kim Jong-un came in when he was in his early 20s or mid-20s, and he had a big learning curve. But I think he's learned a great deal, and I think he's doing a good job of running his country right now and keeping power. Many people thought that he wouldn't be able to control his people and withstand this transition to power. But he's done that quite nicely, and he's firmly in control now.
You think he's a smart guy? Is he an intelligent guy?
One would suspect that he is. You know, there's even the most we know personally about him came from his chef when he was a younger lad, and the chef said he had a quick temper, but what, you know, 13-year-olds don't. I know my son has a quick temper. But we also, I remember reading a story of when he was at the boarding school in Switzerland, when a woman was, or one of his classmates was sitting alone on the swing, and someone observed him go up to her and push her on the swing. I mean, he's probably, it's quite possible he's a good guy. We don't know that, and what does it matter? You know, it really doesn't matter. I'm a scientist, and I don't believe that the trajectory of geopolitical affairs is really determined completely or almost or exclusively by the wills and whims of individuals. I think there are so many pressures underneath, and especially in his case. In fact, we will, I assume, get to my model eventually, and we'll, you know, he is, his power is dependent on the elites who follow him from underneath, you know, the 1,000 or 2,000 elites, just and so he has to behave in certain ways that appeal to their interests. And so he's, you know, he's in a situation where he has certain constraints, and he has to keep aware of that.
How do you, and again, I'm asking you to speculate, but you've obviously studied the situation a little bit. How do you think he views Trump? Because Trump is clearly a different character than, say, Obama or George Bush, or Trump's just not a traditional politician.
No.
Fair enough, like him or not, whether you do or don't. He's not a traditional politician. Whether that's good, whether it's bad, you know, we'll see. But how do you think somebody like a Kim Jong-un views a Donald Trump?
Well, I think that Kim is coming to realize that Trump means business. I agree. Whether you like Trump or don't like Trump, the truth is Trump's a pretty savvy businessman. One way or another, he's got a lot done in his personal and professional life. He might not be the most eloquent speaker. I'm not the most eloquent speaker, but when it comes down to it, he does mean business. As the trade talks with Lighthizer and others now are showing China, I mean, the buck stops with Trump, I think, in foreign policy. And he, you know, and if you don't do what he wants, you're fired. And I think Kim got fired today. Trump fired Kim, and Kim's going to try to get his job back because Kim Jong-un is in a desperate situation. He knows, I think he knows that the United States is well prepared to take out his nuclear facilities. It's been recommended since 2006 by Secretaries of State William Perry and another one. Colin Powell has even suggested that this is something that the United States is ready and willing to do. Whether we can or not is another story, but this would be a great disgrace for Kim Jong-un if the United States, if Trump actually did authorize a targeted strike on the nuclear missile facilities inside North Korea. But many people think that that's one of the few solutions we have, because it's allowing North Korea to have a nuclear ICB, a nuclear-tipped ICBM capable of striking Washington and New York City is just not something very many Americans are comfortable with. You know, people may not understand the science of ballistic missiles, but you know, conventional missiles have to go through the inertia of gravity and, you know, and wind and all that. A ballistic missile, they shoot it up within about we've seen SpaceX with some very successful shots recently. The missile gets out of the gravitational field within about 5 or 6 minutes, and it's in a you know, a frictionless atmosphere. It can travel at, and it does travel at Mach 20 to Mach 25, 10,000 miles an hour. With a 1,000 miles an hour Earth spin, a ballistic missile can literally take off from North Korea and land in Washington, D.C. in about an hour.
Mm.
That's
a frightening thought.
That's a frightening thought, yes.
If the United States were to have some sort of military strike on North Korea, what do you, and of course there's been speculation on that, what happens to Seoul? What does Kim Jong-un do? You lived in South Korea, you spent years there. It seems to me on the surface there an awful lot of risk. That's a tough balancing act.
Well, indeed. On the other hand, I think Trump and the United States would assure Kim that we're not going to try to take him out. It's not a decapitation. This is strictly a military strike into the hinterlands of North Korea. And if he did lob something into South Korea, that our plan would change completely, and it would then suddenly be, you know, take out Kim Jong-un. I think Trump could make that very clear. Therefore, we could, it seems to me anyway, just speculating, it seems to me that this targeted strike could be successful without endangering South Korea. On the other hand, you know, once missiles start flying, anything can happen. Right. I mean, I don't want to
it's like a
minimize
brawl.
this. Yeah, I don't want to minimize the danger here.
Sure. Well, you lived in South Korea for many years, so tell me, what do the South Koreans think? What do they think about Kim Jong-un? What do they think about North Korea?
Well, you know, for 10 years, almost 10 years, I gave a questionnaire to my students, asking them that question, actually. And for the most part, they think unification will happen one day in the future, and they think it will happen peacefully. But many of them don't really seem to care that much right now. They worry about the cost of unification. And of course, I'm familiar with the German data and the unification in the Federation of Germany, and it was very expensive there. It doesn't have to be as expensive as people make it out to be in Korea. So they have unreasonable fears also that the North Koreans are going to come across the border and take over. You know, I mean, in a unified situation, they come over in the, you know, be fighting for jobs, and, you know, it'll disrupt things in South Korean society. A lot of my students felt that way too. You know, none of that probably would happen. There have been some studies that suggest that North Koreans would pretty much stay put. They like where they live. Some would come south, and the border can be controlled to some extent as well. There is a demilitarized zone there. We can control it even after unification, without guns, but through passports and other kinds of means. But in general, the South Koreans want to be unified with their brethren in the North. They just don't see how to get there, and they think it's going to be very expensive.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about your book, Stop North Korea, A Rational New Approach to the North Korean Standoff. So I mentioned in the intro, you kind of have an unorthodox, shall we say, an unconventional way of approaching North Korea. So let me get you to explain it.
Well, I sat back in my chair about 8 years ago, and I was living in South Korea, And looking at that situation, and reading the perspectives from the North and from the South and from China and from the United States, and the first thing that came to me was that everybody had an incentive to unify, for unification, except, of course, Kim Jong-un.
Right.
But we'll get to that. Everybody had an incentive for unification. Japan, of course, would like to have a denuclearized Korea. They would worry about a larger and greater Korea because they argue about Dokdo Island, and they have disputes, of course, that originated from the colonial past, China taking over Korea. But their issues can be figured out. China would have a great interest in it. It would be to China's benefit to have a reunified Korea, providing the United States doesn't march up to the Yalu River and take post there, you know. And if the United States agreed to stay below the 38th parallel, or indeed, once there's a united Korea, there's not much reason for the United States to be on land there anyway. The United States could fall back and should fall back, and many people have expressed as much. China would be happy with that. Taiwan would be happy to have the situation resolved. You know, and of course, North Koreans would benefit. One thing that gets overlooked when we talk about all the geopoliticalness of the situation is that there are probably about 100,000 political prisoners in South Korea right now that are eating rats for dinner. I mean, they're living in desperate poverty. There's more than 2 million children are chronically malnourished. The human rights situation in North Korea today is abominable. It's really unconscionable that the international community has allowed this to go on for so long. And so, you know, I sat back in my chair and I realized that there was incentive for everybody to have a reunified Korea. And of course, when I say a reunified Korea, I mean a denuclearized, reunified Korea. And so I just worked with that premise. I thought, how can we make this happen? And the first thing that came to mind was that Kim Jong-un is completely dependent on maybe 200 to 1,000 elites who support him, like all dictators are. They have to have their you know, he runs essentially a crime family, you know, and so he has to keep these elites in line and have their allegiance. Otherwise, he loses everything. You know, his legitimacy is predicated on their support. So my instant solution was that we have to convince those people that they would be better off without him. They would be better off in a unified Korea. Mm-hmm. And therefore, my first book, when I wrote this first book about, it was published in 2003 or 13. I had the model for, it was $300 billion. Then the newest book, $175 billion, a model that would pay off many of the people in Pyongyang and the elites, and I have it going to the rural areas and stuff. I realize all of that is unnecessary. We really just need to pay off the elites. There's so much money out there that will facilitate the development of North Korea after it gets unified, that I failed in these two books to really isolate the minimal amount of money we could reunify the country. And I think for about a little less than $30 billion, we can completely buy out the elites. Let me just look at this for just 1 second, because this gives a clear understanding of what I got going here. Just imagine if we gave the 10 most powerful elites under Kim Jong-un $30 million. We promised them $30 million each. And then the next 200 people. Under Kim Jong-un, we promised them $20 million each. So now we're up to about $4.3 billion we've spent. Not too much yet. The next 800 people, $5 million over the course of 7 years, okay? I've got a time period into it. And then the upper 10,000, give them at least $1 million. Every general would be promised at least $1 million in North Korea. We'll pay the top military officials, the top 1,200 will get at least $500,000. All told, the whole model costs $29.4 billion over 7 years, by the way. So that's less than $4 billion a year. And we'll pay off a little over 100,000 people, give them more money than they could ever imagine. I mean, just money that should influence their behavior. Money is the motivation for most people today, and whether they're Americans or North Koreans, people want money.
Sure.
They want commodities, they want cell phones, they want two-car garages, they want a house. North Koreans are no different than Americans in that way. Right. And so we can buy them out, I think. We can buy their allegiance. And it really would be paying the elites money that they would, they would get some of anyway if they remained in power. So we're giving them compensation for what they lose. They lose their power position in the hierarchy in North Korea, and they lose whatever income they're all getting now, which isn't nearly as much as we'll give them.
And in turn, they would overthrow Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, imagine Kim Jong-un in front of his his cadre giving a speech, and he knows that the first 7 rows, everybody in the first 7 rows has been promised $30 million, and everybody else in the auditorium $5 million if he were no longer their leader. I mean, what an uncomfortable situation for Kim Jong-un. This is the solution. This would work. And I don't really understand why we haven't, why this hasn't been given more thought or hasn't been discussed in Washington or hasn't been discussed publicly. Imagine the leverage Trump would have if he told Kim Jong-un that he would make sure this fund was underwritten. This is a big deal, I think.
What would stop Kim Jong-un from just killing the elites off? And
it's impractical. They'll get him before he can get them. I want everybody to win here. I want Kim Jong-un to go down as alive and well. I want his family to do well. We don't. He may have done some bad things along the way. People do bad things when they're in bad circumstances. Once again, he inherited circumstances that put him in situations that he had to make probably some life and death difficult decisions. So he's not innocent. I doubt that he's innocent, even though he might be smart and a good guy. Nonetheless, I think he deserves his freedom. And we should make sure that that's a part of the deal. We offer him complete amnesty from international punishment, and we give him at least a portion of his money. Why shouldn't he be a billionaire? It doesn't bother me anyway.
As long as we get the nuclear weapons out.
As long as we get the nuclear weapons out there. I'm a bottom liner,
Yeah. So what kind of pushback, and I'm getting a little short on time here, about 3 minutes left here, but what sort of pushback do you get from people? Because you've written about this in magazines and so on and so forth. That do you get from people? Why won't it work? I mean, is it ransom? Is it a bribe? Is it,
A lot of people don't think Kim will give up his power. And my point is that I don't think he will give up his power willingly either. I don't think he'll have any choice. Trump can make him an offer that he can't refuse. I mean, and that's what this offer is. It's an offer he can't refuse because he can't lead his people if they're not going to follow him. And I think we can intercede in that relationship by paying the elites and and unifying Korea, denuclearizing it, and solving this problem for not very much money.
Have you been able to communicate this message to any government officials?
Some. It's you know, with the new administration, you know, it's we're trying to get the book in Trump's hands, but that's difficult. I have some people working under, you know, at a pretty high level, but you know, there's an institutional resistance to new ideas in Washington that's created a real problem. Most of the think tank people say pretty much the same thing, you know, maybe just a little bit this way or a little bit that way to appeal to Republicans or Democrats, but for the most part, the Washington think tank political establishment isn't willing to think outside the box.
Interesting. I guess in a very short period of time here, though, but do you end up opening the window where now you've got every crackpot running around doing crazy things in order to try to be bought out?
Well, it took North Korea about 60 years to develop this nuclear program. They started in the early 60s. So, yeah, I mean, maybe every 60 years we'll have to buy some.
Gotcha. Well taken. Well taken. Interesting. Very interesting. I have about 1 minute left. Any other books? Working on anything else? You're going to continue to follow this, I'm assuming?
I think I need to write another book. Well, I hope I don't have to, but to really focus in on this $29.4 billion. You know, we really just need to pay the elites off. I mean, when you think about how much money there is in the world today, you know, Apple Computer has $250 billion sitting in a bank account. You know, we could pay for this very easily.
Interesting concept. As I said, it's totally unorthodox. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Jeff.
The name of the book, Stop North Korea, A Radical New Approach to the North Korean Standoff. The author is Shepherd Iverson. By the way, you can see more of our conversations online at WSRE.org/conversations. We're also on Facebook and YouTube. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Take wonderful care of yourself. We'll see you soon.
Support for this program is provided in part by Gulf Power, a Southern company, and by viewers like you. Thank you.